Welcome to this deep dive.
Uh,
Today we're going to be tackling a question that I think has been on a lot of people's minds.
yeah.
And it's, why do people get sick so much these days? And it seems like, especially with kids,
Yeah.
they're always battling something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to kind of dig into this question, we have two lectures from Living Springs Retreat, as well as a New Start Lifestyle Health Guide.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how these sources all kind of converge on this idea that our bodies were actually made to heal.
Right.
Like they have this innate power within them to actually heal.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about health, we always think about things that we can do to fix problems. But what about the body's natural ability to fix those problems itself?
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that we're going to be exploring today.
Yeah. And one of the things that one of the speakers mentions is, think back to when you were a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You're running around outside. Like you very rarely got sick.
Right.
Um, and it just seems like things have shifted so much.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think has caused that shift?
Well, one of the speakers, she brought up this really powerful idea that comes from Proverbs, and it's that there's always a cause for illness.
Okay.
So there's always a reason.
So we have to find the root.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So we're going to kind of put on our detective hats here and explore some of the potential causes for, why people are getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that she talked about is that our bodies, they're constantly giving us signals like whispers that something might be off.
Whispers.
Yeah, whispers, think of like those nagging headaches or that occasional fatigue or maybe digestive issues that just come and go.
Okay.
These aren't necessarily full-blown illnesses, but they could be our body's way of saying like, hey, something's not quite right here.
Interesting.
The problem is we often just kind of ignore these whispers until they become shouts.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, oh, this little thing, it's no big deal.
Yeah, it's fine.
But what if those are the early warning signs?
Right, and then it becomes this like huge problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, so how do we begin to even pay attention to those whispers
Right.
and be able to identify them?
That's where she brings up this really intriguing concept of like two contrasting approaches to health.
Okay.
And she calls them the fear system and the faith system.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of dive into what those are and how they play into this idea of, understanding our bodies and healing.
Okay, I'm really curious now so the fear system versus the faith system.
Yes.
What are those all about?
So the fear system, as she described it, it's this idea that we're kind of like these fragile beings at the mercy of all these external forces, germs, viruses, whatever it might be.
Like we can't control any
Yeah,
of it.
like we're just kind of victims of our circumstances. And so it really relies on external interventions like, drugs and medications to just suppress the symptoms.
Okay.
But it often doesn't address the underlying cause of the problem.
So it's like putting a Band-Aid on. We need like stitches.
Yeah, it's like you're putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound without actually cleaning it or, addressing the infection.
So it's like you're just masking the problem.
Right. And it becomes this kind of like cycle of dependency.
Yeah, you just need more and more and more
Right.
to just keep masking the problem.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense. The fear system. I can see how that kind of plays out.
Yeah.
So then what's the faith system?
So the faith system is this belief that our bodies have an incredible, like, inherent capacity to heal themselves.
Wow.
It's like built in.
Okay.
And so it emphasizes more natural remedies and lifestyle choices that actually support the body's own healing mechanisms.
Okay, so how do we even begin to tap into that faith system?
Right.
Like how can we actually encourage our bodies to heal themselves?
Well, you bring up a good point because, like, what about those situations where, maybe you have a really serious injury or a really serious illness?
Right, you can't just like wish it away.
Exactly.
Right.
And she actually addresses this directly in one of the lectures, and she shares her own personal experience. She had a broken wrist,
Oh, wow.
and she opted for a combination of conventional medical treatment. So she got the bone set,
Like the practical thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But then she also used natural remedies to support the healing process.
So she used both.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily like an either-or situation.
Right, it's not like all or nothing.
Exactly.
You can kind of use what you need from both.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about like rejecting one system completely, but it's about understanding, what are the strengths of each system.
And where can they work together?
Exactly. And finding that balance.
And I think, too, that kind of leads into the concept of patience.
Yes.
Because, like, we live in a society where we want the quick fix.
Oh, for sure.
We want the instant results.
instant gratification.
Yes, and sometimes healing takes time.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we've kind of lost touch with. We want to just pop a pill and have everything be better. But our bodies, they often need time and they need the right conditions to actually repair and regenerate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it seems like there are so many things that kind of influence healing.
Right.
And one of those things that gets brought up a lot is genetics.
Mm.
You always hear, oh, it's in your genes.
Right. It's your destiny.
Yeah. But there's this concept of epigenetics that's kind of changing that whole conversation.
Yeah. Epigenetics is so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's basically showing us that our genes aren't this like fixed blueprint.
Oh,
Our lifestyle choices, what we eat, how we move, how we manage stress can actually influence how our genes are expressed.
so we have more power
Yeah.
than we think we do.
Way more.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just about like, oh, I inherited this gene, so I'm doomed. It's like, no, you actually have a lot of control over how that gene is going to play out in your life.
So then what are some of those things that can damage our DNA
Okay.
and hinder that healing process?
So one of the sources actually revealed this statistic that I found really startling.
Okay.
It said that 92% of DNA damage is caused by mineral deficiency.
92%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
I always thought minerals were like just for, strong bones and teeth, not
Yeah.
necessarily for our DNA.
Yeah, but they're actually crucial for DNA replication and repair.
Wow.
And the problem is that modern farming practices, they've really depleted our soil of these essential nutrients.
So even if we're eating healthy,
Yeah,
like we're doing the right things, we're still not getting what we need.
exactly. It's like you can eat a whole plate of vegetables
Right.
and still be deficient in certain minerals.
So what do we do?
Well, the sources, they really emphasize the importance of choosing nutrient-rich foods whenever possible.
Okay.
Like, for example, one of the speakers pointed out that a single organic tomato can have 9 times the iron of a conventionally grown tomato.
Oh, wow.
So it's a huge difference.
That's a huge difference.
So it really highlights the importance of, understanding where your food comes from and how it's grown.
Yeah. Okay, so that makes sense. So we've got the mineral deficiency piece, but then there's also toxins
Yes.
that are constantly kind of bombarding our DNA.
Right.
So what are some of those, and how do they actually cause damage?
So we've got the usual suspects, caffeine, refined sugar, alcohol, tobacco.
Sure.
And these substances, they actually leach minerals from the body.
Oh, so they make that mineral deficiency even worse.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It's like a double whammy.
Okay.
And then caffeine in particular, it disrupts neurotransmitters,
Mm-hmm.
which one of the speakers suggested could be contributing to things like autism and ADHD in children.
Really?
Yeah. So it's pretty concerning
That is
when you
concerning.
think about it.
Yeah, and especially because like caffeine is so prevalent.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's in our drinks. It's in our food. It's like we're constantly being exposed to it.
So this idea of temperance, which is one of the principles of New Start,
Yes.
is about just being really mindful.
Yes. It's about making conscious choices
Yeah.
and realizing that, even these small things that we might not think about, they can have a really big impact on our health over time.
So it's like the cumulative effect.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Okay, so we've got the mineral deficiencies, the toxins. Are there other factors that can kind of disrupt our internal environment and hinder that healing?
Well, one of the things that the speakers dive into is this fascinating world of microbes.
Okay.
These tiny little organisms that play a much bigger role in our health than we often realize.
So when I think of microbes, I'm like, oh, those are germs.
Right.
Those are bad guys.
Yeah, we're taught to fear them, kill them all.
Exactly.
But the truth is that most microbes are actually essential for life.
Really?
Yeah. They're the master decomposers. They're the ones that break down matter and return it to the earth.
So they're like the recyclers.
Exactly. They're part of this amazing cycle of life. And so she actually shared this story about a scientist named Antoine Béchamp.
Oh.
And he did this experiment where he took a dead cat.
A dead cat.
I know it's kind of morbid.
Yeah.
But he put it in an airtight container.
Okay.
And even though it was sealed off, from the outside world, the microbes that were already present in the cat's body, they eventually broke it down
Wow.
and returned it to dust.
So even in death, there's life.
Exactly.
That's kind of beautiful in a way.
Yeah, and it kind of shows how microbes are always at work, even in places where we wouldn't expect them.
Okay, so we're not just walking compost heaps,
Not quite.
but we do have a lot of microbes living inside of us.
We do. We have trillions of them.
Trillions.
Yeah, and get this, They actually outnumber our human cells 10 to 1.
10 to 1.
Yeah,
So we're more microbe than human.
in a way, yes.
That's wild. It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, so then what are all those microbes doing inside of us?
Well, they're busy little guys.
They're breaking down our food, they're helping us absorb nutrients, they're protecting us from pathogens, they're even nourishing our cells.
They're like a whole little workforce in there.
Exactly, they're like a hidden ecosystem working 24/7 to keep us healthy.
So how do we even know they're there if they're so tiny?
Well, we can't see them with the naked eye.
Right.
But scientists can study them using microscopes and DNA sequencing.
Okay.
And it's really only been in recent years that we've started to understand just how important they are.
So we're still learning about them.
Yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
Wow, this is so interesting.
It's a whole new world
It is.
that we're just beginning to explore.
Okay, so we've got these microbes living inside of us that are helping us.
Yes.
But then we're also told that we need to kill germs.
Right?
Like, how do we reconcile those two things?
So that's a really great question, and it actually brings us to this kind of like debate in the scientific world.
Okay.
So there's this classic theory that was popularized by Louis Pasteur, and it's this idea that germs are the primary cause of disease.
Okay.
So it's like the germ theory.
Right. Kill all the germs, you'll be fine.
Exactly.
Okay.
But there's another scientist named Antoine Béchamp,
Okay.
and he argued that it's actually the terrain of the body.
The terrain.
Yeah, like the internal environment
Okay.
that determines whether germs can thrive and cause harm.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's not just about the presence of germs.
But whether our bodies are like welcoming to them?
Exactly. It's like, are you creating a hospitable environment for those germs to multiply and cause problems?
So it's like if you have a healthy immune system,
Right.
they can't really take
Well,
hold.
exactly. You're more resilient.
Okay, that makes sense.
And she uses this really interesting example of Florence Nightingale.
Oh, the nurse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she achieved incredible results in reducing mortality rates during the Crimean War,
Yeah.
long before antibiotics even existed.
Wow. So how did she do that without all the modern medicine that we have today?
By focusing on hygiene and sanitation.
Okay.
So she understood that creating a clean and healthy environment was key to preventing the spread of disease.
It's like that old adage, cleanliness is next to godliness.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's so true. It shows that even before we had the ability to target specific microbes,
Mm-hmm.
we could still create conditions that made it harder for them to thrive.
Okay, so it's not just about like killing.
Right.
It's also about creating an environment where they don't want to be.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So we've talked about mineral deficiencies,
Yep.
toxins, microbes.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like there's this underlying theme of creating a healthy internal environment.
Yes.
That's really what it all comes down to.
It's the foundation.
Yeah, so how do we do that?
Well, that's where the 8 laws of health and the New Start lifestyle come into play.
Okay.
They provide this framework,
Oh.
this roadmap for making choices that nourish our bodies and create the conditions for optimal well-being.
All right, I'm ready to dive into that, but I think that's a perfect place to stop.
Uh-huh.
And we'll pick up in part 2
Sounds good.
to really explore that New Start lifestyle.
All right.
Thanks for joining us so far.
Yeah, thanks for listening.